Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1879, the wind slammed against the side of the Oswell family ranch house like it had a score to settle. And still, no one inside opened the door for Zadie. She stood on the porch, arms wrapped tight around her middle, boots sinking into a patch of early frost. Her cheeks burned from the cold and from the shame. Behind the heavy oak door, her husband's kin whispered. She could hear them, not even bothering to lower their voices anymore. Her man's dead. That means she's got no place here, hissed one of the older aunts. She was never one of us. That was his brother, Willard. No blood ties, house belongs to us now. Zadie didn't cry. She had done enough of that the day they buried Thomas. He had gone under the wheels of a freight wagon 6 weeks ago, leaving her a widow at 23. And now, his family had made it clear they were done with her too. She didn't even get to pack her things. They had locked the door. The only things she had left were the clothes on her back, her wedding ring, and the barn cat that kept winding around her ankles like it too had been cast out. The sun dipped lower behind the hills. She had no horse, no money, and nowhere to go, but she knew someone who might help. The trail east to the ridgeline was dry, but the wind had teeth. Zadie walked with her head down, shoulder aching from where the strap of her bag was cutting into her skin. By the time she reached the split-rail fence of the neighboring property, dusk had turned the valley to ashes and gold. The barn door was open. Inside, a man stood hammering a rusted horseshoe against the anvil, his sleeves rolled and the firelight warm on his arms. The sound rang out steady, solid. He did not look up until she stepped into the light. "Zadie." His voice was surprised but gentle. "What are you doing out here this late?" She hesitated. "They locked me out, Elijah." He blinked once, then again, his mouth set into a firm line. "Your husband's family," she nodded. "I got nowhere to go." He tossed the hammer aside and crossed the barn in 3 long strides. "You are not sleeping out there in this cold." "I do not want charity," she said quickly, chin lifting. He paused, then gave a slow, careful nod. "Then you will stay here as a guest, not charity. You can rest, eat, and figure things out. I have the extra room." Zadie's eyes stung. Not from tears, not exactly. From the way his voice steadied her, like he was already holding up part of her weight. Elijah Vance had been Thomas's boyhood friend, and he had always treated her with quiet respect, even when Thomas's family had not. He was a rancher too, but solitary, never married. Folks in town said he had no interest in women, but Zadie had seen the sadness in his eyes the day of the funeral. The way he had stepped forward to help her stand when her knees had buckled graveside. The way he had looked at her that day like he wanted to shield her from the whole world. By the time the fire crackled in the hearth and the stew warmed her belly, Zadie sat curled in a blanket on a worn settee, her boots by the door drying near the heat. Elijah brought her tea. Not because it was proper, but because he had always remembered she liked it. She wrapped her hands around the tin mug and looked up at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" He sat down slow across from her. "Because they should not have shut you out, and because I want to." She looked down into her tea. "I do not have anything, Elijah, not a dollar to my name. Not even a working coat. They took everything." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You have yourself. That is more than most." Zadie stared at him, unsure why that made her chest ache in a new way. He cleared his throat. "I will build you a room, a proper one, with a door of your own. You will not have to ask anyone for shelter again." She blinked, stunned. "You would do that," he nodded. "You deserve better than what they gave you." She could not speak, not for a long while. He stood and moved to the window. The moonlight lit his profile strong, calm. "You already proved you got grit, Zadie. Now you just need a place that sees it." By the week's end, Elijah had drawn up plans. He did not say much while he worked, but he showed her every cut of wood, every nail, every planned corner. The room would be built off the south side of the house with its own small porch. "It will face the hills," he explained one morning, motioning from the cleared dirt patch. "Nice view at sunrise." Zadie stood beside him, arms crossed, wind tugging at the loose ends of her shawl. "I never thought I would have anything that was just mine." "You will." He turned his head and their eyes met. He always looked at her like he saw her not just the widow, not just the cast-off, but the woman underneath it all. The one who still had fight in her. And something in her chest shifted. The first snow came early by then, the walls were up and the roof was halfway done. Elijah worked long hours, letting her help where she could. She carried boards, held nails, even learned to use the hand saw. And each day, the way he watched her changed. She noticed it one morning when she tripped slightly carrying a stack of shingles. He caught her elbow, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. She looked up and he was closer than she expected. His hand lingered warm through her sleeve, her breath caught. "I am," she whispered. Neither of them moved. He let go gently, stepping back, but his expression stayed with her all day. And that night she dreamed of soft touches and warm hands in her hair. On the last day of construction, he carved her name into the frame of the new door, quietly, without telling her. She found it later, running her fingers over the curve of the letters. "Elijah," she murmured, stepping back inside with tears in her eyes. He stood by the hearth, hammer still in hand. "I wanted you to know that this is yours." She walked toward him. "No one has ever done something like this for me." "I should have long ago," he said, voice rougher than usual. She reached up, touching his cheek. "Why?" He looked down at her, something raw and unguarded in his gaze. "Because I have loved you for years, Zadie. I just never had the right to say it." Her breath caught. "But I do now," he said quietly. "If you will have me." She kissed him. There was no hesitation, no fear, just her lips against his and the way his arms wrapped tight around her like he had been waiting for this moment all his life. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. "I never thought I could love again," she whispered. "You can," he said. "With me," she smiled, and it felt like sunlight breaking through the last of the storm. And outside, the door he built for her stood strong, the carving of her name catching the light. A door of her own, a life of her own. And now, a love that would never shut her out. The morning after the first frost held a hush that reached even the low hills beyond Elijah's land. Zadie stepped barefoot onto the plank floor of her new room, the boards cool under her soles, and let the quiet settle around her. It was the kind of silence that came after a storm, not empty, but full of the weight of what had passed and the slow promise of what might come. She pulled her shawl tight and opened the door he'd built. The porch faced the hills, just as he'd said, where dawn spilled over the land in pale orange and soft grays. Smoke trailed from the chimney, and somewhere beyond the barn, a rooster let out a half-hearted crow. Elijah was already out, his coat drawn close, moving slow through the pasture with a feed bucket. She watched him for a moment. His gait was steady, shoulders broad and familiar. It steadied something in her too, something that had been trembling ever since the ground dropped out from under her. When she stepped outside, the cold bit her ankles and she hurried toward the barn, her breath a pale cloud in the air. He didn't hear her coming until she was near the fence. "You always up this early?" "I was raised on a farm," she said. "Sunrise isn't so much a choice as it is a habit." He looked over, brushing hay from his hands. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough," she said. "It creaks a bit when the wind pushes, but I think I like that." He nodded. "Wood's still settling." "It'll tighten before the season turns hard." She leaned against the fence. "There's something I'd like to do if you'll let me." He tilted his head. "I want to build a garden, just a small one. I know it's late in the year, but I can prepare the soil now, lay in ash and compost, get it ready for planting come spring." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You've got a good way of looking forward." She gave a quiet smile. "A garden keeps me steady." "Something about tending to things that grow." He scratched at the back of his neck. "There's a patch west of the shed that gets good light. You can have it." She looked at him, surprised. "You'd give up grazing space for vegetables?" "I reckon I've got enough grass." "But not enough color." The words hung in the air. She didn't answer them, not with speech. Instead, she stepped through the fence rail and began gathering stones to mark the garden's edge. By mid-morning, her hands were dirty, the sleeves of her dress damp with dew. Elijah brought her a tin cup of water and crouched beside her. "You always work this hard when no one's looking, especially then." He chuckled low. "You want help?" She glanced sideways. "You ever plant anything? Only fence posts. That's not the same." He wiped his palms on his trousers. "No, but I'd like to learn." She passed him a handful of seed pods she'd dried from her old herb patch, ones she'd slipped into her pocket the day they locked her out. "Then start with these. They'll go in first come spring." He took them carefully, as if they were something more than dried husks. "What are they?" "Chamomile, for tea and sometimes for grief," he nodded once. "Then they'll be the first thing we plant." She didn't say anything, but her breath caught just a little at the word we. That afternoon, he hitched the wagon and asked if she wanted to ride into town. "Supplies," he said, but his eyes lingered on her face like he had other reasons too. She hadn't been to town since the funeral, and she hesitated, her hand tightening on the edge of her shawl. "You don't have to," he said. "I can go alone." "No," she said after a moment, "I should go. I won't let shame keep me hidden." He helped her into the wagon like it mattered to him that she didn't stumble. She hadn't ridden beside a man in weeks, not like this, shoulder to shoulder, hands occasionally almost touching on the bench. The ride was long and quiet, the wind tugging at strands of her hair. She didn't mind the silence. It wasn't the kind that made her feel alone. In town, heads turned, some looked away quick, others lingered. Words rose like smoke in doorways and under awnings. She felt them land, but none stung like she'd feared. Elijah walked beside her, one hand resting loosely near his belt, not touching her, but close enough to make a point. At the dry goods store, he waited while she picked out cloth for curtains and a bundle of beeswax candles. She paid with the coins he pressed into her hand before they left the wagon. "I'll repay you," she said quietly while the shopkeeper wrapped the goods. "I know," he said, "but it's not a debt. It's a beginning." They rode home with the sun low behind them, the wagon full of the scent of spices and pine soap. She watched the road, her hands folded in her lap. "I don't know what folks expect of me now. I'm not who I was, but I don't know yet who I'm becoming." "You're becoming someone who knows her own worth," he said, the reins slack in his hands. "That's more than most." She looked over, and his profile caught the last of the light, strong, steady, and open. When they reached the house, she helped him unhitch the team. They worked side by side without speaking, the rhythm between them easy now. As night came down, she lit one of the new candles and set it in the window of her room, the soft glow flickering across the porch he'd built. From the yard, Elijah looked up and saw it. He tipped his hat, not as a farewell, but as a promise. She pressed her hand to the glass and felt the warmth of the flame. Inside, the air smelled faintly of beeswax and pine. And for the first time in a long while, she felt not just safe, but seen. A week passed, and the earth hardened beneath the first true freeze. Zadie cut muslin for curtains at the kitchen table while Elijah brought in firewood, his boots leaving a trail of snowmelt across the floorboards. A kettle hissed over the stove, steam curling into the rafters. She'd never had a space that truly fit her hands before, a place shaped by her choices, not someone else's claim. It was new, and it made her quiet inside, like she was listening for something still forming. Elijah stepped in from the cold, shaking the snow from his coat. "Mail rider passed through this morning," he said, setting a folded envelope on the table beside her shears. "Said it came from Cheyenne." Zadie wiped her fingers on her apron before picking it up. "I don't know anyone there." He didn't answer, just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her as she opened it with care. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside, a lawyer's seal. Her husband's name, Thomas Oswell, appeared once in reference to a small account left in his name. The letter stated plainly that the funds had been claimed by Willard Oswell on the day after the funeral, with no mention that a widow existed. Zadie folded the paper slowly and turned it over in her lap. "He took it." Elijah's voice was level. "You want me to go into town?" "No," she said, laying the letter on the table. "I don't want any part of what they kept. That money came from cattle Thomas drove for his father. It was never mine." He nodded, but didn't shift from the wall. "You still have rights under the law. I'd rather build something that's mine in truth, not by ledger." That night, she finished sewing the curtains and hung them herself. The fabric caught the lamplight softly, and when she stepped back, she smiled, not because they were perfect, but because they were enough. Elijah watched her from the doorway, his arms loose at his sides. She turned to him. "I'd like to take in mending. Folks in town always need shirts hemmed, seams patched. I can earn my keep that way." He didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need and I'll get it. I've got cloth, thread, and needles." I need only a table, one that sits right by the window. I'll build it tomorrow. They stood a moment longer in the golden hush of the room. Would you mind if I used your mother's old frame? She asked, voice low. The one hanging in the loft. His eyes flickered. You found that? I dusted it off yesterday. It's solid still. He stepped into the room, slow. She'd like that. She always said hands that mend things carry more strength than hands that break. Zadie reached out, brushing her fingers lightly along his wrist. She sounds like she knew what it meant to endure. She did. He looked down at her touch. So do you. They didn't speak after that, not for a while. The warmth between them needed no words. The next morning, Elijah cleared a space near the window. By dusk, a table stood there, hand-planed, with soft edges and legs that didn't wobble. Zadie ran her palm across the top, then pressed a kiss to his cheek before turning back to her thread. He didn't move for a long time after that, just stood in the doorway watching her set the first shirt across the table. The days grew shorter. Snow came heavy one night, blanketing the hills in silence. Elijah strung extra wire along the fence line, and Zadie began stitching by lantern light, her fingers moving with practiced rhythm. One afternoon, while she ironed the cuffs of a rancher's shirt, a knock came at the front door. Elijah answered it, and a woman's voice drifted in sharp, uncertain. Zadie stepped beside him. On the porch stood Miss Lyle from the church, hands clasped around a bundle of clothes. I heard you were doing repairs, the woman said, eyes flicking to Elijah, then back to Zadie. I've got 2 dresses that need altering. My sister's girl's grown out of them. Zadie nodded once. I charge honest for the work. If that's agreeable, I'll have them back in 4 days. Miss Lyle hesitated. You're not going back to the Oswells then? No, Zadie said. I'm home already. The woman's gaze shifted again. All right then. After she left, Elijah closed the door behind her. That'll get around town before nightfall. She didn't come for gossip, Zadie said, folding the dresses over her arm. She came because she needed something done right. Elijah stepped closer. You've built more than a place, Zadie. You've made a name. She rested her head against his shoulder for a moment, breathing in the scent of pine and horses and firewood. I'm not afraid of what they say anymore, she said. I've got something better. What's that? A life I chose. He kissed her then, slow and certain, like laying claim to something already theirs, and when they parted, he touched her cheek with quiet reverence. Come spring, I want to plant more than chamomile, her throat caught. What else? A home with you in it, not just on the edge of mine, but all through it. She met his eyes. You sure? I've been sure longer than I knew how to say. She nodded, tears rising swift and bright. Then let's build it, she said. Together. Snow clung to the eaves like pulled wool, and the wind quieted after days of rattling through the branches. Zadie sat at her sewing table, daylight stretching pale across the floorboards, guiding her stitches through a pair of worn trousers that smelled faintly of linseed and saddle soap. A knock came not at the front but against the back door where few folks approached. Elijah opened it. A man stood there, shoulders hunched from the ride, his coat streaked with travel dust. A bay horse waited behind him, tied to the post and steaming from the run. I'm looking for Mrs. Oswell, the man said, cap in hand. Zadie rose, wiping her palms on her skirt. That name belongs to someone buried in the ground. I go by my own now. He nodded once, gaze direct but not unkind. Name's Finch. I'm out of Laramie. Your husband worked alongside my older brother a few seasons back. I only just heard what happened. She stepped forward. What brings you here? Finch glanced at Elijah, then back to her. He owed my brother a small sum for a team of mules they sold together last spring, but my brother passed 2 months back. I've got no interest in chasing ghosts for coin. Just wanted to square the ledger in person. Zadie's brow furrowed. I don't have funds to pay an old debt. I'm not here for money, Finch said. There's a rifle. My brother left it with Thomas as part of the trade. I'd like to offer it to you if you've a use for it. He always said you had a steady hand. Behind her, Elijah shifted his stance. I'd be glad for it, Zadie said, but I'd offer something in return. Finch gave a tight nod. You so? I do. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a coat with a torn lining. She's my wife's. Caught it on a fence post. Couldn't mend it proper myself. Zadie took the coat. Leave it till tomorrow, you'll have a meal before you ride. Finch hesitated, then stepped inside as Elijah moved to hang the man's coat. Cold air swirled behind him before the door shut firm. Later, Zadie stitched the lining with even care while Elijah carved strips of dried venison for supper. They kept near each other, their movements quiet, comfortable. Elijah handed her a mug of cider without asking, and she took it with a nod. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked, after Finch had gone to rest in the barn loft for the night. "Not once," she said. "I did my time in rooms that weren't mine. I'll not return to any place that never saw me." He leaned against the hearth, one boot crossed over the other. "I've been thinking about spring, about cattle, about how you might want hens." "Hens," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Fresh eggs," he said, glancing toward the pantry. "You could trade or sell them with the mending. Folks pay well for both." Zadie smiled around the rim of her tin cup. "I'd like that, though I'll leave the hammering to you. I never much liked building with nails." He gave a soft laugh. "Then I'll see to a coop." The next day, she wrapped Finch's coat in brown paper and handed him the bundle with a warm biscuit tucked inside. He thanked her without much flourish, then slipped the rifle from his saddlebag. "Cleaned and sighted," he said, offering the weapon across both palms. "It's sound." Zadie took it, examining the stock, the notches along the edge. "She's seen use. She's reliable." Elijah stood beside her, one hand resting lightly near his belt, watching. Finch adjusted his reins. "You've done well here," he said. "Better than most would." "Because someone let me stand long enough to do the work," Zadie replied. Finch tipped his hat, then rode off into the pale morning. That afternoon, Elijah led her to the far corner of the pasture, where the snow had melted just enough to show the dark line of fence posts. "This spot's got afternoon sun," he said. "Good place for hens if you want them near your window." She leaned her shoulder into his. "I'd rather they be near yours." He looked down at her, something quiet and sure in his eyes. "Then we'll build it together." They marked the posts with stone and walked back slow, boots crunching in the thawing ground. Inside, the fire was low but steady. Zadie set the rifle above the hearth, not as a weapon but as a reminder of what had been endured and what had been reclaimed. That evening, while the wind shook dry snow from the trees, Elijah reached for her hand without ceremony. She let her fingers twine through his, palm to palm. "I've still got things to learn," he said, voice low. "About living with someone. About sharing space." "I'm not asking you to know it all," she said. "Just to stay when it matters." He nodded once. Then he pulled her close, and they stood that way as the firelight shifted across the room they had made together, not out of rescue, but out of choice. Sleet turned the yard to a patchwork of slush and frozen mud. Elijah laid a plank across the worst of it, so Zadie could reach the barn without soaking her boots. She crossed carefully, apron skirts tucked up and cheeks stung red from the weather. Inside, the hens clucked softly in their new roosts, feathers fluffed high against the draft. One had laid early, a pale brown egg still warm in the nest box. "I think they like it here," she said, brushing straw from her hands. Elijah handed her a folded scrap of paper from his coat. "Came down from Fort Bridger, mail driver passed it along." Zadie opened it slowly. The handwriting was crisp, official. "It's from the land office. They're offering parcels," Elijah said. "South end of the valley, not worked land, but clear enough to manage with time." She studied the note. "They're asking for homesteaders," he nodded. "We could file together." Zadie turned to him, wiping her palms on her apron. "You mean to move?" "I mean to start something that belongs to both of us, not just a room on the edge of my house. A home we build from the ground up." She looked out toward the hills where the snow broke in long shadows across the ridgeline. "We'd need to haul lumber, fence the boundary, dig a well. I've already spoken to Silas about lent oxen. He's willing if we help with his branding come spring." Zadie folded the letter. "Then we'll go to town tomorrow and put our names to it." Elijah touched her elbow. "Not just for the claim, I want to marry you." Her breath left her in a single exhale. "You do?" "I don't want to wait through another season calling you anything less than what you are to me." She didn't answer at once. Her fingers found his, cold from the barn air but steady. "Then let's do it proper. Let's build the land and the life both." They were married 3 days later in the parlor of the circuit judge's home, with only the judge's wife and a boy from the feed store to witness it. Zadie wore her mended wool dress with new lace sewn at the cuffs. Elijah had shaved and brushed his coat free of trail dust. When the vows were spoken, he kissed her like he wasn't afraid of the years behind them or the ones ahead. They spent that night in the house they'd shared since autumn, but it felt different now, each room gentled by the weight of their choice. By the first thaw, they'd filed the paperwork and begun clearing the land. The parcel sat near a slow bend in the creek, where cottonwoods leaned like old men swapping stories. Zadie planted herbs near the door and strung twine for drying beside the window. Elijah built the frame of their new house by hand, his hammer steady and purposeful. He worked late into the evenings, lantern hung from a beam, and Zadie brought him bread wrapped in cloth and sat beside him while he drove nails. They didn't speak much, but their silence held shape and meaning. When the roof was laid and the inside swept clean, she walked into the empty room and turned a slow circle. "There'll be a cradle here someday," she said. Elijah set the tool basket down. "There will." She rested her head against his chest. "I never thought I'd feel safe again." "Not really. You're safe with me," he said. "Always." They moved into the house before the first wildflowers bloomed. The hens followed, pecking near the porch. Zadie's sewing table stood by the window again, this time looking out over the land they'd claimed together. In town, folks began calling her by her married name without hesitation. Orders came in steadily: dresses, shirts, coats lined with ticking. She hired the widow Harper's youngest to help with deliveries, paying her in butter and cloth scraps. Elijah's herd grew, and he taught Zadie to ride the new mare he'd traded for with the spring calves. She took to it quickly, skirts tucked and posture straight, her hair pinned beneath the bonnet she'd sewn just for the rides out to the edge of their land. One evening, long after the sun had dipped and the stars had spread wide overhead, they sat on the porch with a blanket across their laps. Zadie leaned into him, her voice soft. "Do you ever miss what came before?" He took his time answering. "Some things, but not in a way that pulls me back. Because what I have now, what we've made, I wouldn't trade it for all the comfort or ease I thought I wanted when I was younger." She looked up at him. "You've changed. So have you." She reached up and brushed the edge of his jaw with her thumb. "I love who we've become." He kissed her with quiet affection, the kind that wasn't rushed or greedy, just full. When they pulled apart, she smiled. "I think the hens have finally settled," she said. "They laid 4 today." "Then we're rich," he said. They laughed, low and warm, and stayed outside until the night turned cool. The years ahead came slow and full. They worked side by side through dry spells and storms, planting, mending, building. Elijah taught their first child to walk in the shadow of the cottonwoods. Zadie stitched quilts from worn shirts and scraps of wedding lace, her fingers still sure, still gentle. No one locked her out again. No one ever would. And in the home they built with their own hands, where every board was set with care and every morning broke over land they called their own, they loved each other without fear, without haste, and without end.